It took all of Benjamin's strength not to cry out in frustration as he woke from his nightmare. This time it was a sixth sense of déjà vu, as if he'd lived the event. Though he still couldn't identify the man who killed him, it wouldn't have made this new perspective any easier to bear. The worst part had been Byron's pleas for mercy and use of Benjamin's nickname. He had only had this vision or dream from Byron's perspective until this one, and it was worse. As he tried to force water into his body, he found he wanted to do many things at once. Scream, throw the blankets off of himself and run around the room. Then, wake up by slamming his body into a patch of likely fresh fallen snow outside. Meanwhile, Byron was starting his day in a much less chaotic way. He got up early enough to use the baths by himself, instead of with the crowds of soldiers who normally piled in to get ready for a long day of drills, formations, combat, and other such things. These were led by Varric, since he knew Jaken's forces, having been part of them for most of his life. He hadn't told them that key detail, of course. Byron let the heat from the bath pull on his muscles and soak into his bones. His power was always pain-inducing, and while the pain never fully subsided, hot baths were the only thing that stopped him from hurting, and were his only solace from it. Byron pulled up his arm and gave a pleasant look at the pinkish-red skin that greeted him. The steam that came off like flames from a log always made him smile for some reason.
Looks like I've had enough.
Byron had to be careful. He'd almost overheated himself a couple of times, but luckily did not get sick. Just a little humiliation as someone had to help him get out before he passed out. Byron stepped out fully nude, apprehensive of any sudden cold gusts if the door opened. The bath itself was out in the open near the doors to the outside, but the dressing area was at least set behind a wall. Byron swallowed the thought and moved quickly to where he could get dressed and not be attacked by a gust of icy air. He was still giving off steam. Byron dried off and got dressed, finishing the uniform by setting his armor and fastening his cloak. He didn't flip the hood as he walked out since his hair was still a bit damp. This created ice in his hair sometimes, but he didn't mind. Opening the door, he stepped outside to find Varric, Benjamin, Elizabeth, and Roan standing in a circle chatting and drinking. Byron shrugged. His bath must have been longer than he thought.
Good morning.
Before he could finish his greeting to the group, he suddenly found something hard fastened around both of his shoulders. With the sudden loss of his bearings, all Byron could hear was wings flapping and the biting cold. When he was finally let go, he found himself on a solid surface, unsure what it was. When Byron collected his senses, he looked down on the group that now had a new member, one Tyrus Clade. Oh my god, it worked. I had no idea what was going on. He was all quiet and tense, and Tyrus stopped, and Benjamin's head gave a cool but disapproving shake. Then the rest of the group turned whiter than the freshly fallen snow. And he's right behind me, isn't he? Tyrus began to turn around. Listen, Byron, it was just In very quick action, Byron Hayne had gotten his revenge by using a small speed burst and then using his strength to throw Tyrus through the air. It happened so quickly, in fact, that some of the group were still processing it.
Where's Tyrus?
Elizabeth looked over toward Byron, confusion on her face.
Did you throw him?
Byron thought for a second and then realized.
Oh, crap. That probably happened so fast that you couldn't track it. Hang on, let me explain. See, Tyrus just flew me up to the roof of the bathhouse as a joke. But I got mad, so I threw... Well, here he comes now. He'll explain it better than I could.
Tyrus was indeed making his way back to the group. He had now shifted into a large bat. He landed without incident and immediately held his hands up in a truce.
Ty, that was not a good idea. Byron hates practical jokes.
You could have warned me.
I'm doing it now.
Yeah, only after he threw me halfway across the damn world.
Oh, come on, you're fine. I didn't exactly know you'd be fine, but you're fine.
Tyrus's face showed shock. Ben stepped between his brother and Tyrus.
Enough, children. It's Christmas morning. Let's be nice.
Byron made faces behind his brother's back as Ben faced Tyrus.
I brought you some hot cider, Byron. But if you keep making those faces...
Despite having not seen him, Byron knew his brother's attitude well enough to know those faces were being made. Byron shrank just a little.
Merry Christmas, you guys! Now bring it in! I want to know what all of our plans are before the big feast tonight.
Eventually, Tyrus and Varric left to go do their own thing, leaving Ben, Byron, and Elizabeth to themselves. Byron slurped his cider and looked for people to help. Despite the holiday, the fort was still busy adjusting itself to new troops. Rebuilding some salvageable buildings from the first attack by Jaken's soldiers, and bolstering for the likely attack that was in motion. At least, according to Varric. Byron had taken to helping when he could, when he wasn't training. It helped him become well known by the people here. He was well liked, and people stopped looking at him in the anxious way they did when they only saw him as Prince Byron. He'd found some peace here. This was his world. Byron no longer felt constrained by his position.
What are your plans for the day, little brother?
Just looking for someone that can use my help. Feeling pretty great after my long morning soak.
What about you, Liz?
No plans. Just gonna sneak around the kitchens and steal food.
Listen, I'll see you guys later.
Byron handed the mug of remaining cider to his brother as he saw a perfect candidate to help out.
Mr. Thomas, wait up. What are you doing out here?
Byron started a slow jog toward an older-looking man who was holding some long wooden supports for a container he was trying to build.
And off he goes.
Good. Now someone can explain what happened between Tyrus and Byron earlier.
Ben smiled, placing an arm across her shoulders.
Sure, come on. I want you to grab me some samples from the kitchen, too.
This is Kevin Anderson, your narrator. You are listening to Shepherd, Journey of the Time Walker.
Byron found the one-on-one company of Mr. Thomas, who he frequently helped, to be a great help to him as well. He easily picked up the wood the older man was carrying and slung it over his shoulder, using only a little bit of strength. It must have looked odd, Byron was sure, but he didn't mind the stares from the few out moving other things.
Your ankle was banged up pretty bad. You shouldn't be out here.
Ah, hush. I just need to do something. Twiddling my thumbs is terrible even when I'm sore.
Sore? You're hurt. There's a difference.
You're gonna make a great wife someday.
Byron couldn't help the smile or the blush that accompanied it.
My father used to say the same thing to me.
Ha! I knew I liked that guy.
Was this it?
Yes, thank you. Would you like to help me build the frames?
Actually, yes, I would very much. If I get tired enough, I don't have to go spend time at the feast. I don't like crowds. I don't know if you know that.
They'll be disappointed.
My brother can do that part. I just want to help where I can.
You should go for at least an hour. Get some food. My wife's helping in the kitchen. She makes this amazing stew.
Wait, is that the one from the mess when we brought in the new recruits 2 months ago?
The very same.
Damn you, stomach! Alright. Okay, I guess I'll go.
That's a good boy.
Byron helped Mr. Thomas finish his frame building. Then he went on to help finish small tasks like moving boxes, cleaning, and even setting a few saddles on horses, even though he was still afraid of them.
Afterward, Byron went to his assigned quarters and sat in meditation to relax himself. He really did not want to go to the feast. It would be much too loud, and too many people he didn't know would be there. Byron knew he couldn't just slip in and out. It never worked that way. People would know who he was, and that would mean they would know if he was there or not. Byron really didn't want to be known as someone who was too good to spend time with his people.
Byron's meditative state did relax his mind eventually. He found that the tension he felt was being replaced with well-being and resolved to do what he knew he must. Also, Byron hadn't seen his brother at a party like this since he had celebrated Byron's 10th birthday.
The smile that found Byron's face as he approached the hall doors stretched almost ear to ear, thinking about his brother and being able to see him again. Benjamin, on the other hand, was already in the room. It was full of people, mostly men and young men meant for a coming battle. This was a different sort of crowd than any Byron or Ben had seen gathered. Ben noticed Byron slip into the hall. 2 long tables were separated by a carpet that split the room in half. Some of the soldiers nodded to Byron and saluted with their drinks. Ben watched his brother. This day started bad, with Ben waking from his usual nightmare, and the day had just gone to worse places from there. Benjamin Hayne was sure he was cracking under the weight of his impending death because he felt like he had lived this day 100 times. It was as if he knew and didn't know what was going to happen. He was so tempted to use his powers, but he didn't. Something stopped him in his heart, a feeling that this destiny was important. It was impossible for him to settle in, and he tried to wipe the feeling from his face. Elizabeth and Varric were enjoying their time together, chatting about the recruits and training. Ben guessed at their conversation as he sipped from a mug of wine. He enjoyed the crowds and the many stories that unfolded around him. Ben stood up and wandered the room. People stopped him a few times to say hello or even to refresh his wine. But none asked about his royal heritage. He didn't mind. Byron, on the other hand, was never quite so lucky.
Byron was fending off hellos from some of the female trainees. The men tended to keep their conversations to polite nods. Nearly 2 hours had gone by, and he'd gotten some food and drink. But Byron was already outside the limits that his earlier meditation had offered him.
He wanted very badly to leap out of his own skin and flee, screaming as loud as his lungs might allow. Byron knew he was shutting down. But in his panic, he found himself unable to move or express his discomfort. He tried to swallow, but found a knot in his throat. When he thought he might collapse to the floor, an arm went around his shoulders and pulled him into a side hug of sorts.
Come on, buddy. Let's get you outside.
Byron leaned onto his older brother for strength. They pushed through the crowds, opening the doors into the foyer. Byron relaxed a bit and carried more of his own weight. When the doors to the outside opened up, Byron never remembered a breeze this cold, feeling so good.
There was a small silence that followed, where Byron only heard his brother's heartbeat. He'd heard it many times before in times like this. It had been his anchor. He relaxed finally.
It's still too loud.
Huh?
When you were little.
The brothers separated and stood side by side. Byron looked at the ground, and Ben looked at Byron, a slight grin on his face. He put his hands into his pockets, and the animal skins they both wore fluttered in a slight breeze.
You were probably like 5 or so. We had this big harvest feast for the surrounding villages. People came from all around to see Mom and Dad. It was crazy busy, and we just lost track of you. Mom was so freaked out, and Dad was just trying to calm her down while I looked for you.
Byron looked up at his brother to make sure this wasn't a lie. Byron knew how to read faces, and Benji wasn't lying as far as he could tell. It was Ben's turn to look at the ground, unable to stand the piercing, innocent gaze that had fallen on him.
It was a couple frantic hours of searching. We thought you might have gone to your room. When I didn't find you there, I went to my room, then I went to Mom and Dad's room, and then back to my room. You were nowhere to be found.
I was always kind of good at hide and seek.
Oh. Anyway, we were all about ready to think the worst when I caught sight of your shoes. I mean, Just imagine his little feet barely poking out from under the cloth covering one of the long feasting tables.
Ben closed his eyes to picture the memory and missed the blush that heated his little brother's face against the cold.
You've always been easy to startle, so I pointed your feet out to Mom, who covered her mouth and started to cry. All I remember is working my way under the table and seeing your little hands mashed against your ears, your chin hanging almost to your knees, like a scared little creature. I tried to pull your hands away from your ears, but you kept crying out, "It's too loud! It's too loud!"
Ben swallowed the sudden emotion he felt. It was one of the rare things he hadn't seen about his brother's life. Ben saw so much of his brother's life and future over these last 15 years that he had a hard time feeling like he was actually supposed to be part of it. Though, in this instance, he'd shared a truly meaningful moment, and it had bonded them. Ben looked at his brother as that little kid for the first time since he'd left to start setting his brother's path. He had so many regrets. He wished he could go back and change some of his choices, but it didn't work that way. The first had made that very clear.
When I did get you to take your hands away from your ears, they were just as red as they are now. I guess it's still too loud.
Byron shrugged. A silence followed, and neither Byron nor Benjamin could find the right words to break it. They stood there, frozen in place. Steam from their breathing was the only indicator they were alive. The orange glow of the tower light and full moon set the mood of a silent courtyard. Byron finally thought of something to say, but before he could speak, a snowball whipped through the air and smacked him straight in the chest. Stunned, Byron turned, searching out his attackers, and quickly found them, or rather, her. Alexis Frey, a tall, olive-skinned girl, looked back at him with just as much shock as he had felt moments before. She was the self-appointed leader of the other 6 children that remained here with their families. And while their parents worked, the children would get into mischief. Byron himself had to round them all up once for causing a ruckus near one of the working areas.
Alexis?
I'm sorry. We were just having a snowball fight.
I can see that. Why am I involved?
Because I have really bad aim.
Is that really why?
Byron began to pick up snow and form a snowball.
It was an accident, I swear.
Alexis?
Huh? We were... We were just... It was an accident, honest.
Well, tell your friends we're joining their game, and there are new rules. It's us versus...
Byron turned his head over his shoulder to see his brother's face, and wasn't disappointed. His brother had the most maniacal grin.
Him!
Byron threw the snowball right at Ben's chest and immediately scrambled to get away, his exuberant laughter echoing through the moonlit night.
What the hell? Fine! Game on, you little...
Ben reached down to grab some snow of his own. If revenge was a dish best served cold, Ben thought to himself, this was perfect. The next half hour was spent by Ben hunting and peppering his adversaries, one by one, with snowballs. The younger kids he was gentle with, but he was waiting for his chance to get his little brother back.
Byron! I know you're close by.
Ben called out to make Byron anxious with a lie, hoping to flush him out. It didn't work, and Ben continued walking carefully, muffling the sounds of his steps so he might catch others instead of him getting caught. He was about to give up in frustration when something caught his eye to his left. He spun around to face it, but it was a blur. Ben felt a rush of excitement and anticipation. He prepared for the confrontation and then realized.
Hey!
Ben's yell was perfectly in time with the wave of energy that erupted from his body and froze the world in place. There he was, Prince Byron Hayne, his little brother, speedily prepping snowballs to hurl at his big brother. Ben couldn't help it. Despite freezing time, Byron's body still moved with a bit of speed. It looked weird, and he'd never seen the effects in this way before. Whenever he had used this ability before, which was rare, he only saw the aftermath as everyone caught up to reality. Ben smiled as he began to formulate a plan. Within a minute in his time, he set everything into motion. He took his time, getting into the best viewing position, and unfroze time. Byron barely collected his bearings before being smacked with 8 well-placed snowballs in rapid succession. To Ben, seeing his brother's boyish face covered in snow was priceless.
Oh my god, it worked! I didn't know I could do that!
Byron was still shocked, but gathered himself enough to hurl the accusation.
You cheated!
I did, but you tried to first.
What was that?
Hyperspeed.
Ben swallowed as he looked at Byron. He never wanted Byron to know what he knew or how he knew it. For him, Byron's ignorance was precious. He knew what it would mean if Byron knew the truth. He'd seen it play out in numerous possible futures during his meditations in the Blue Room.
Sorry. Truce?
Ben smiled weakly while Byron's face turned dark with mischief. Before Ben could react, he was on the ground. Byron had double-legged him with a small burst of speed. Ben hit the ground harder than he thought was possible in the snow. Now struggling under the weight of his brother, he stopped at the sound of Byron laughing.
Oh my god, why did I do that? Now my pants are soaked.
Really? Your pants are soaked?
Both laughed as they got up. Ben suffered another wave of déjà vu, convinced he'd experienced all this before. He shook his head in a vain attempt to rid himself of the feeling. A bell began to ring. The watchtower bell.
Oh, no.
Ben began to understand why he was having such a hard time. This was it. The future was now the present. Remembering it like it had already happened. For him, all of this had played out many times, including his death. That was the agonizing trouble with his visions. They were vivid, yet vague, often without context or circumstance. The exact sequence of time and events had been elusive, yet inevitable. Now, for the first time, he realized this was the moment he'd spent far too long witnessing. The fateful moment had arrived. Tyrus Clade, who purposely manned the watchtower to avoid going to the feast, flew down in the form of a small dragon, having rung the bell adequately. People began emerging from wherever they were and gathering their weapons. The bell wasn't a summons. It was a warning. Tyrus had seen something in the expanse beyond the gate. Tyrus transformed back into his human form and stood in front of Ben and Byron. I didn't get a clear look, Ben, but looks like a few hundred people with torches. And Ben, they do not look friendly.
You did the right thing.
I'm going to grab my gear and change my clothes. I'll be 2 minutes, tops.
Ben and Tyrus nodded to Byron to acknowledge they heard him. The young man took off. As soon as he was out of earshot, they turned to each other to speak as chaos began to unfold around them.
It's time, Tyrus.
What do you... Tyrus stopped the words as quickly as he started them, because Ben's face filled him in. Oh, that.
Yeah.
This is writer-director Joshua Kisberg, and you're listening to Shepherd, Journey of the Time Walker.
Off beyond the gate, still some miles' march from it, was a man and his lackey. Jacon stood watching the backs of his soldiers march in perfect lockstep, guided by the puppeteer's will. Jacon's vengeful smile radiated from him. Everything's going smoothly, sir. The element of surprise is ours.
And the tip of the spear?
exactly 10 minutes ahead of our army. They'll spot him first. The panic will be perfect.
I have waited 35 years for my revenge on William Hayne. Do not screw it up.
Oh, of course not. Never.
You lost Zeke because you were careless. This is much bigger than that. Your best is required. You screw this up now, and I will kill you.
Yes, sir.
My sword comes for you, William. I wonder if you can answer it.
Byron stood out in the courtyard checking his equipment.
Do you need a hand?
Ben's question wasn't an offer. It was an announcement that he was helping. Byron hated it when he did that, but right now he didn't need to fight about issues of pride. He let his brother handle him roughly, helping fasten the leather armor, and then Byron felt his cloak surround him.
We need to send a scout to have a look. Tyrus, you're up.
I'll go with him.
He doesn't need your help.
If something goes wrong, he'll need backup.
You need to stay here and help get our defensive measures in place with Varric.
That's not...
I'm not arguing about this.
Then neither am I.
Ben pulled his brother into a hug.
Be safe out there. We'll be right behind you.
Ben swore he could hear pain in his brother's voice, but shook it off to focus on his new task.
Okay, Tyrus. How do we do this?
Easily. Byron watched as Tyrus morphed into a ball first, and then formed into a bigger dragon than the one he'd flown down from the tower as. Byron would probably never find this ability unimpressive. As he went to climb on Tyrus's back, a thought stopped him.
Can you talk in your animal form?
No, I can send my words telepathically.
Byron nearly fell backward as the loud and clear telepathic words rushed into his head.
Holy shit. Okay, this could have been revealed to me months ago. That's a hell of a thing to just spring on someone.
You can speak as you normally do. I can't read your mind. I can only project my thoughts.
That's a relief. Any more creepy secrets?
Just get on, we're wasting time. Byron snapped himself back into an attack frame of mind. He almost had let the reason they were out here slip from his mind over the surprising power revelation.
Grab between my neck scales on either side. They'll be strong enough to hold you while we fly. Sorry, there isn't any time to put the dragon saddle on.
Dragon saddle? Never mind. Let's go have a look.
Byron felt a tinge of fear and dizziness as he rose into the air, watching the soldiers of Fort William continue to prepare for battle. He'd hoped this was all in vain.
Really? They're doing this on Christmas?
I know.
Byron hadn't even realized he said that out loud. They began a glide after several thrusting wing flaps. He was glad he had changed out of his wet clothing. The chill was so cold, Byron thought his face might crack. They flew out into the dark of the expanse, which was not as dark when they were this close to the full moon. Byron surveyed side to side as they glided, trying to spot the enemy while simultaneously hoping they didn't actually find anything. There! Byron saw them in the snow. They were wearing white and other light colors to blend in with the snow. The only thing that distinguished them was their torches. It was an army of about 400, Byron guessed.
Circle around and stay high. We don't want to get shot at.
I'm aware. Tyrus heeded the command and then circled around to get a look at the entire army. It wasn't too large. They thought Jakin might have as much as 1,000 troops by now. There was one good thing, at least.
Oh, shit. Tyrus, look out front. Get in closer.
Byron had seen a smaller advance force. It was a couple miles in front of the main force. The only reason Byron had seen it was because of the large creature that sat in the middle of the soldiers, marching in careful lockstep with them.
I thought I killed you.
What?
That's the same guy I faced in the woods, freeing the refugees. He's back somehow.
Are you sure?
Completely. Listen to me, Tyrus. They're too close to the gate. You have to swing around and drop me so I can cut them off.
I don't think Ben...
Listen to me. This guy is strong. If he makes the gate, he will destroy it, and our defense strategy will be completely screwed up.
Tyrus couldn't think of a response.
When you drop me, go back as fast as you can and help get everyone ready. I'll buy you as much time as I can. This asshole doesn't get to surprise me twice.
Byron drew in a breath and began to consider how to do this.
Circle him so we're facing head-on with him.
Then he had an idea.
Hey, can your front right leg support my weight?
Probably. Why? Byron didn't answer. He'd already begun the pour inside his mind. His body began responding as the energy surged through him. Carefully, he began laying to the right, wrestling his left leg over the scales on Tyrus's body. Then Byron swung his body to the side and slid cautiously until he reached the front right leg. If the leg couldn't hold him, this would go very badly.
Here goes. 1, 2, 3!
Byron swung himself again and then used his momentum to drop straight down and grab Tyrus's leg. Looking down from a few hundred feet in the air, he finally felt nervous.
We've likely been spotted now. Get me low, 15 or 20 feet.
Byron was tense now, and Tyrus was quiet with concentration as they approached the ground. As it came closer and closer, the white snow, reflecting the moonlight, relaxed Byron in an odd way.
Give me a cue if you can.
Byron closed his eyes and let his legs hang loose as he glided through the air. The harsh cold stung his skin like nicks from a razor blade, despite the protection of his cloak. Now! The command was so sharp in Byron's mind he didn't have time to hesitate. He just let go. The landing was easier than he expected. He landed feet first, about 40 feet in front of his target. It was perfect. He pulled down his hood and unfastened his cloak so he could push it behind and out of the way. Byron drew his sword and smiled.
Okay, you son of a... Time for round 2.